Hello, my name is Eric Paetkau, and I am the music director of the Saskatoon Symphony. I'm here with Dean McNeil, the artistic director of the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra, and for the first time in both of our histories, we are combining the two orchestras, the Jazz Orchestra and the Saskatoon Symphony, and we're here to talk about the upcoming show, The Nutcracker meets Duke Ellington. And Tchaikovsky's score, The Nutcracker, is one of his most popular works and also one of his best written works. And Dean can tell us a bit about the Ellington as well.
Yeah, so this piece, it is closely associated for good reasons with the Duke Ellington band, of course. A lot of people consider Duke Ellington's instrument to be his musicians. He kept a lot of these people on the payroll for up to 30 years. One of the people was Billy Strayhorn, who did this particular arrangement. So Billy Strayhorn and Duke Ellington were such close collaborators musically that they themselves, after they wrote some music, 5 years later, they couldn't remember who wrote which piece. So a lot of collaboration and emulation going on between those two. So when the Ellington band took on the project of taking, a masterpiece, and I think that's really important too, that the original Tchaikovsky is not only an incredibly popular piece of music, it's a masterpiece in its own right. And then what they did is they put their own kind of stamp on it. These guys, and jazz musicians in general, but I think Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn were masterful at kind of embracing all of the different influences that were going on around them, socially, economically, musically. They were very, very well-traveled musicians. This band basically left the Cotton Club in New York City in the 1920s and spent the rest of their time on the road.
All over the world.
All over the world, yeah. These guys, I'm sure, saw it all. So I think one of the things to think about this concert is a reimagination. And the fun thing from the audience's perspective, as I see it, is you're going to come to this concert, you're going to hear a masterpiece in its original form, and then you're going to hear these kind of Duke Ellington jazzified versions of it that are not meant to be trite or anything. They're really beautiful works.
And masterpieces in their own rights.
I think so. And
you'll hear them. We'll play the Tchaikovsky, then the Ellington, Tchaikovsky, Ellington. So there will be a really neat combination of the
back and forth, and that play back and forth. You can kind of hear the imagination of both composers at work, if you want to think of it that way. Even the titles of the tunes, like for example, "Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies," of course everyone knows. Beautiful piece in the way he's got it orchestrated and everything.
With the new instrument at the time, the celeste, which was very new, and Tchaikovsky loved it, and he wanted to make it because it was the heavenly sound of the fairy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then Strayhorn did this in a very, very different way. He's got like all these kind of jazz sounds, and he retitled many of the works. Or many of the movements, rather. That movement is called Dance of the Sugar Rum Cherry, which is like, and this idea of double entendres are not lost on musicians, especially people like Ellington and Strayhorn. Ellington never actually called his music jazz after the 1920s. He saw his music as a reflection of the African American experience. And Greg Marion, the head of the music department at the U of S, he brought up an interesting point that he was saying, I wonder when he was titling that tune, if he was also making reference to the sugar and rum trades that were a major part of the slavery movement. So it has this kind of cutesy aspect to it, but when you kind of drill down into some of these titles as well, so it's one of those things that I don't think you need to know anything about Ellington or Tchaikovsky to enjoy this concert, but the more you learn about these guys and how they were innovators and how they were, like, to me, embracing the celeste, and Ellington using the plunger mute, they were taking stuff, new things that were coming around at their time, and doing imaginative things with it. So I think it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, and you mentioned the world influences, And there's a little connection that while Tchaikovsky was writing his Nutcracker Suite, he actually interrupted the writing to go to New York to conduct the opening of Carnegie Hall. And so this was, of course, before Ellington's time, but 10, 15 years before Ellington was born, Tchaikovsky was in New York. And we talk about Tchaikovsky embracing the celeste, or Ellington and Strayhorn embracing all of the new stuff around them, whether it was from the US, whether it was from Eastern Europe or for Asia, wherever they went. That's a great sign of wonderful artists who incorporate what they hear around them into their music. So there wasn't actually much time difference between when Tchaikovsky wrote his piece and when he was in New York to when Ellington was born and started, of course, getting influenced by everything around him.
That's right, you know, and like I love those, you know, those world map timelines where you see all these things happen and then you see these things that are like, oh my God, these things actually lined up. I thought of them as in different universes.
Right,
you know?
right.
There's not a lot of time difference between Tchaikovsky and the 20th century, of course, when Duke Ellington did all of his stuff. And you know, another question I'd have for you is, did Tchaikovsky know the musicians that he was writing for? I'm just curious about that.
He did. He knew, he wrote, of course, a lot of ballets, and he wrote for the ballet company in St. Petersburg at the time, and for the choreographer, the main director there, a Frenchman, Paetkau, I'm not sure how you say it, but he was there from 1871 to, I think it was the late 1890s or even early 1900s. So this gentleman commissioned Tchaikovsky often to write works. And interestingly enough, for the Nutcracker Suite, each movement, he wanted a tempo, he wanted an exact amount of bars for the dancers, of course. Okay. And this Tchaikovsky took as a real challenge because he loved trying to fit these parameters into his own genius of composing. And what's you mentioned, was it, did he know the players? And he did know the players and he knew what to expect, but also the dancers, some of the dancers he knew. But the initial performance of the Nutcracker, the actual ballet, was panned by the critics because there was actually a double bill of his new opera, the Iolanta. And so with those two, it was a very long evening. And when he actually took some of the movements, the 8 movements that we hear, condensed it into a suite, that became hugely popular, only a short time later.
So that's interesting because like Duke Ellington wrote for these guys. Like when he wasn't writing for second trumpet, he was writing for Cootie Williams or Barbara Wiley or whoever.
So very specific.
Very specific. And for a while, I thought that was really something unique to Ellington, but it actually wasn't. Like we see this all over the place. Bach, there was a trumpet player whom Bach wrote the B minor Mass for, and if it wasn't for that guy, he wouldn't have written those particular trumpet parts. So I think that's really fascinating, the idea of knowing for whom you're writing, knowing the location where you were writing. Like he would have known the room in which the ballet is going to be performed. There's that saying that creativity is born in constraint and dies in freedom, right? Like saying, okay, I've got 700 beats to put together this movement. And then of course when Ellington and Strayhorn were looking at doing this, they couldn't just, you can't just do whatever you want. If you want to do something, if you're going to do the Nutcracker, there are many constraints that you're going to have to work around, right? And that's where people, I think, often have it backwards. That's a lot of time where people's creativity flourishes, is when you're painted into this corner. Instead of saying, you know, it's a blank sheet of paper, I can do whatever I want.
Right.
And I think from the audience perspective as well, when you're listening to this concert, I think that would be very interesting to just kind of reflect upon, is like, how do you reimagine somebody's incredibly famous, incredibly high quality work, do it justice, but make it your own as well? Like, those are fascinating questions, I think.
Exactly.
And they were just masterful at that. So.
We're talking a bit about reimagining, how Strayhorn and Ellington reimagined Tchaikovsky's music. Can you give an example of how they, let's take one of the most famous movements, the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and what elements they used or what sort of compositional techniques they use to transform that?
Sure. So one of the things to keep in mind is that in Western European art music, traditionally, clear, clean sounds are considered beautiful sounds, right? And the celeste being the idea of creating this idea of fairies, and it's a very light, shimmery sound. It's a very pure, piercing sound. I don't have a celeste with me, but if I play that on the trumpet, the idea there is to create a resonant, in tune with respect to the tempered scale sound. And at the very, if you go way back to the very roots of jazz music in New Orleans, around the turn of the 2 centuries ago now, you have all kinds of cultures kind of smashing into one another. It's like putting a square peg in a round hole. You have church music, you've got gospel music, you've got the Creoles of color, you've got marching band music, you've got Spanish influence, French influence. There's all this kind of different melting pot. And unlike other places in the United States at that time that were really trying to quash a culture that was not kind of Western European based as the high art form, people were kind of allowed to kind of do their thing down there. And from that, going way back, you know, in terms of slavery, when you move people, you don't just move physical laborers, you move their sense of culture. And in West African music in particular, in Ghana, bird raspy sounds are considered beautiful sounds. So you kind of take that kind of musical aesthetic or cultural aesthetic, if you will, mix it all together, move forward, you know, many, many years. And then you have these guys playing a combination of how they hear music, how they think about music, how they think about the aesthetics of music, and you get them to play those types of things, you're going to get something like this, which is an Ellingtonian version of that same thing. So that kind of like, the academic word is greasy. It's kind of this greasy, grimy thing. So I think that's one of the things that that stark contrast between the two that you will hear. You will hear this kind of looseness in the Ellington. You'll hear improvising, of course. You'll hear that kind of greasiness. So they're playing these melodies, but they're kind of jazzing them up. And it often raises a good question, like, what is jazz? How is something jazz, you know? Like, and to be honest, I don't know the answer to that.
Anyone, yeah.
But it's like saying, what is classical music?
Yeah, exactly,
like, you know,
exactly.
It's a pretty wide pantheon. But what's kind of neat these days, we were talking about before we started, is that audiences are so hip these days. We don't think of them that way, but they're, you know, even the advent of the iPhone, that when you used to go jogging to your Walkman, you know, you'd put in a tape and then you'd listen to those 6 songs in that order. And nowadays, people are used to experiencing through the remote control, through the internet, through iTunes, different types of music right beside one another.
Yeah, and those lines are blurred constantly. Constantly.
And that's kind of the fun part.
Exactly, I completely agree. And it's funny that we think of, you know, even now it's much more accessible in terms of the music we can listen to, but even back 100 years ago, you talked about Ellington and his band traveling around the world. I mean, they were in Eastern Europe, they were in Asia, they were everywhere. The great classical composers that were influenced by jazz, for instance, you know, Ravel and Debussy and all of them, or painters, you know, who went to the South Pacific, for instance, you know, and all of this, that all comes out in their artwork, and that is kind of their iPod shuffles of that time. And a great point that you made of the slavery, where you say it's not just human labor that's transferred, it's cultures. And when people immigrate to different countries and move around the world, that is a constant exchange of cultural aesthetics.
You know, I agree, and like I've been in Saskatoon for 17 years. I know that you're still new here, but one thing I'm excited about from an artistic point of view, as well as an economic and political and everything else, is in the past 10 years, we've had an absolute explosion of different ethnic cultures moving to town. And anytime you take people from different parts of the world with different backgrounds, you stick them together, you get interesting art out of it.
Exactly.
So I think it's an exciting time for the groups like the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra and the Saskatoon Symphony. It's an exciting time for the arts in general. Even just, you know, where we are on 20th Street, it's like there's all these cool shops popping up, and like it's a very exciting time to be doing what we're trying to do here.
That's true.
And those different groups, they really mix up the pot about what's possible in really interesting, and again, we keep coming back to this word imaginative ways, right? Because the programming I think that you're doing now, you probably couldn't have done when I got here 15 years ago.
Right, right. And that's happening all over the classical music scene, the music scene, you know, let's even drop that word. And you see it all over the country, all over the world, and you feel that vibrancy here in Saskatoon.
Yeah. So it should be really exciting. It's an exciting show, and I should say, you know, thank you so much for allowing, you know, the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra. It's a little. We just got started a few years ago, and you know, the Saskatoon Symphony is what's the second or third oldest orchestra in Canada? Fifth oldest. Yeah. So we very much appreciate the opportunity to share the stage with you. It's going to be great. One kind of special thing is we've got some guest artists coming in the jazz orchestra. Mark DeYoung from Calgary, John McCaslin from Calgary, but we have a fellow named Brad Shigata who is coming from Winnipeg, who he played trombone in Duke Ellington's orchestra for about 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I asked if he would bring with him, he's got a score of music of Ellington's that has never seen the light of day. It's never been played, it's never been performed.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So what I was thinking is that we could put it on display, ask people not to pull out their iPhones and cameras and all that. But, you know, as you know, just getting to sit down and see a piece of music written by a master in their handwriting, it's kind of transformative, you know.
Well, thanks, Dean, for joining us today, and we are thrilled to be joining with the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra and having the two, the Tchaikovsky and the Ellington Strayhorn, together. It's going to be a wonderful Christmas pop.
Well, thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Same.